Hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. This will date very quickly, but happy. I'm glad you're here. This is the official title of our session is How to Bring More Ease, Joy, and Purpose to the College Admission Process. And this is ostensibly for parents and students, but there may be some counselors, there may be some teachers here. In fact, Ashley, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind sending out a quick poll to see we'll just do parents, students, counselors, and sorry, this is awkward, but other. And if you're an other, you can let us know in the chat who you are. But I'm joined by some very special guests today, and I'd love for you to introduce yourselves, Morgan and Tom. Morgan, will you just say hi to the folks and I don't know, say whatever you feel like saying?
Hey, everybody. It's great to see you and have you here. My name is Morgan Phillips, and I am one of the college counselors at College Essay Guy and have been a college counselor for the last 14 years and worked in college admissions prior to that. So it's been my whole career has been immersed in this field, and I love the idea of starting the year with you and helping you feel a little bit more ease and joy, and purpose will come too, but especially the ease right now.
Yay. Tom, tag.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Campbell. I use he, him pronouns, and I am College Essay Guy's community manager and one of the essay coaches as well. And yeah, I definitely am echoing what Morgan and Ethan are saying about just being happy to be with you all and trying to think about this year and this new start to January. For me, it's been personally a new start. I actually moved to Southern California after being in Maine with my family for a few months. So yeah, juggling kind of just the new year and knowing that we have a new crop of eager students and parents who are maybe many of you are parents and students who are juniors and you're just thinking about this process. So it's always kind of exciting to kind of shift focus and start with a new impressionable group of people who are looking to go through this process with ease, purpose, and joy. So I'm hoping that I can be a presence to assist with that. The background and perspective that I bring to the table here is that I used to work in highly selective admissions prior to working as a college counselor at an independent school in Seattle. I worked at College of the Holy Cross, which is where I went to college, and Pomona College, just 30 miles away from where I am now in Southern California, one of the Claremont colleges. So you'll be hearing a lot more about both of those schools shortly. So I will pass it back on to Ethan.
Yay. We've clearly got a theme for today because we all definitely said ease, purpose, and joy. I'm gonna challenge.
Well, it is in the title, so
I know. I didn't need to say it. I didn't need to say it anyway. We're gonna say it once or twice more, and then we won't say it. I'm self-conscious about being repetitive because I sometimes repeat myself. Okay, so first we're going to talk about how do you find your guiding compass for this college admissions journey. And there's an actual exercise we're going to go through in about 2 minutes. And then we've got this cool one for discovering your strengths. This could be a resource that I would say parents or students or counselors, you've got, let's see, 33 counselors here, which is rad. What do colleges look for? I'm going to kick it over to Tom for that to talk about what highly selective colleges look for. How do college admission officers review files? And then we'll have a little session on okay, so then based on all this, what can you do given this? And Morgan's going to talk specifically about thinking about summer. We know it's way early to be thinking about summer. It's January, y'all. So why think about summer now? Well, we're planting seeds. We're hoping to plant seeds. And also there are some opportunities that will pop up in the February and March months that we want to make sure that you're thinking about. And then I'm going to do a little crystal ball moment, which I rarely do, and try and go here's what I think is happening in the world of college admissions and shifts that may be coming. And then we're going to share with you this cool program that we're launching tomorrow that we're super excited about. And I'll spend a couple minutes on that. And then we'll do Q&A. Those are the things. All right, it's going to get dark in here, so in a minute I'm going to have to turn on a light. So our check-in question, in case you missed it, is kind of a broad one, admittedly, but it's something like, what are you checking in with today? Where are you at? Could be mentally, emotionally. Feel free to let us know in the chat. Okay, so I want to start with a little exercise related to purpose. And one of my favorite exercises, and if you've read either of my books, I talk about this, because I think it can be an anchoring force, is values. And I'm going to throw a link in the chat right here. And I'd love to spend a minute, and I want to use this. I want to do kind of a focused values exercise for a second. And this one is for students, parents, or counselors. I want you to look at this list for a minute. And this is not the be all end all list of all the values, but I want to just take a minute to reflect on, let's look back on last year. And I want to ask you two questions. Number one, if you had to think about last year and what you called into your life, in other words, what you brought in, what you focused on, what value from this list jumps out at you? And second question, what's the specific way that you brought that thing more into your life? So an example for this would be one of the things that I brought more of into my life was fun. And I guess games would go in there. And the way that I did that, I jumped on the pickleball bandwagon and have been like totally playing pickleball like 3 times a week. So I would be like value, fun. Way I did that, pickleball, 3 exclamation points. So question for the room, and let us know in the chat, what is a value that you focused on this past year, whether you meant to or not? And what specific way did you use? Like, how did you call that into your life? What did you do to bring that into your life more? Same. Patricia's another. You maybe have a dinking problem like me, Patricia. It's a pickleball joke. My wife got me a shirt for Christmas that said I have a dinking problem. I got some direct messages coming to me. Let us know in the chat. I want to get some, let's get some. Had another baby. Congratulations on you. Amazing. And thanks for being here. Self-love, traveling a lot solo. Oh, I love that traveling is connected to self-love.
Tora, learning to surf. That's been on my bucket list for years. Everyone keeps telling me, like, you moved to California. Why aren't you surfing? Like,
what are you doing?
Well, it has been flooding, so, you know, I'll just grab a board.
That sounds great. Lovely productivity, starting a new business. Congrats, Julie. So you can see where this goes. And if we had more time and we wanted to just do this, we could spend, 5-10 minutes talking about, hey, here are the values that I really focused on in the past year. And I would actually invite you to do that if you wanted to at some point, to think about, hey, what did I call in? And another way of thinking about this is just celebrating. What am I celebrating from this past year? And I find that this list of values actually gives me ideas. It gives me a menu of things to think about. Because if someone just asked me like, hey, what are you celebrating from last year? It might take me a minute. But if I look at this, I'm like, ooh, I'm celebrating. And I could grab 6 more. But this is a really elastic exercise. And we use it in a few different ways. I want to let Morgan talk to you about another couple ways that we use this. Morgan, handing the baton to you.
Yeah, well, I think if I reflect on the last year and I think about the values list, there's so many. I could probably tell you a story that includes half of them. When I think about just living life and how it all comes together. The one I would pick is balance. And I don't know if it's as exciting as some of the others in terms of like examples, but when I think about life balance and choices I'm making, somehow keeping that feeling that things are in check and in line is really important to me. And so over the course of the past year, I changed jobs and moved and sold a property, actually 2, and just like did a lot of things, all those big life things in one year that they say you shouldn't all do at the same time. So tried all of those things and then tried to maintain balance. And then some of that compassion for self when things feel uprooted and you have to make a choice about how you want to handle that, because it's easy to get frazzled. But I also, use the values exercise when I think about, I just did it again this morning to kind of get my brain ready for this session tonight. And there's so many things that I think about on a regular basis. Authenticity is one of them. And when I think about work as a college counselor, authenticity is it's just the home for everything. It's a guiding light, I think, in some ways for choices that I make when I advise students, choices I make then about what I do in my own life. That when those choices align with my values, everything feels kind of congruent, and that brings me balance, which goes back to the original point. So I like to incorporate some of those values too when I work with students, as far as thinking about what decision will feel best for you, right? Because the college admissions process has lots of decisions. Some are really small and seem insignificant, and some seem really huge and like everything depends on them. So just bringing it back to that authentic grounding for decision making, I find really important. I also, think about community. I could just throw that in there, and just like, what communities are you a part of that bring you joy, and that bring that joy into your life? And so that's one thing I've also been thinking more about lately, and cultivating that sense of engagement in community. Because sometimes, like when I channel my introverted side, it's easy to kind of feel like you're part of something, but like you don't have to really dive in fully. And I think since in the past few months and being part of the CEG team, I often think about like how much gratitude I have for the community, and to actively engage in that makes it richer. So that's definitely part of it for me. I'll take that as a sign to.
No. I realized that I was like thinking you were going to talk about the values exercise, and I was like, Morgan's got a lot of cool stuff to say. Let me stop sharing this values exercise.
Yeah.
Do you want me to hop into the other ways of using the values exercise, or do you want to do that?
Why don't you start and then I'll jump back in.
Great. So a couple other cool ways to use this exercise. Number one is as we think about our year, as we think about the year that's to come. So new question also for the chat. What's a value that you'd like to call in for 2023? If you had to sort of use this as an anchoring thing and sort of like, visualize and again, important question. How could you call this value into your life? So using it as you're looking ahead to 2023. Pausing to let you actually think about this and maybe type something. The second question is harder, is like, okay, but then what's the specific thing that you could do to bring it in? And some of us are, you're going through this process, you're going through this college admission process, whether you're a parent or student. We've got like 2/3 parents here. Let me ask you this. Other ways that you can use this. What is a value that you would wish for your child in this process? As you're thinking about the way that they go through this, like what is that value that could be an anchor? And then what is your wish for yourself as you think about the college admission process? So I realize I asked you 3 questions. I'll say them again. 1, you could just be like, value I'm calling in for 2023. More specifically, what's a value or wish that you have? And if you're a counselor on this session, for your students. And then for yourself. So Erica is saying growth and excitement for my kid. She was saying efficiency, being more diligent about grouping tasks and roles. Self-learn. By the way, we're going to email you all these 6 months from now and be like, remember what you said? I'm kidding. You said courage. So isn't this a courage? Doesn't this seem like a courage moment? Cool. A couple folks are coming up with courage. This is lovely. Yeah, Ashley's writing them all down furiously, she says. They're going to actually show up. Owls are going to bring them in. They're going to swoop in magically when you're eating in the Great Hall.
One of the values I would want that doesn't seem to come up, I don't think we think of it in the same way, but is sleep. Sleep is on this list. And one of my favorite psychologists talks about teenagers and sleep, and how when things start to go wrong, usually it's because they're not getting enough sleep. So I wish everybody here tonight good sleep as a value.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I feel like in my experience, like working with students and doing the values exercise, like I feel like people see sleep and they're like, they don't want to choose it because like they feel like it's like not big enough, or like not like, I don't know, impressive enough or something. And I always like have to kind of remind them like, no, like if you had to like look at this list as like, no, these are the things that like really are, they are the building blocks of me. Like don't like stifle down or like suppress some of the things that you're really feeling connected to, or really feeling like make you the person that you are every day. And if sleep is one of those things, like lean into it. I guess that's like a mini soapbox moment for me, especially to any of the students who are tuning in, of like, don't choose values based on what you think the counselor who you're working with is going to be impressed by. Like choose them for you. Because I feel like if you choose it with a lens of like, these are the things that other people are going to like more, that's a slippery slope. Yeah.
There's another exercise that I really love when and again, we're kind of theme is purpose right now. There's, maybe y'all have seen this, but maybe you haven't, the VIA character strength survey, and you can sign up for a free profile as a student. I think if you're a counselor, it charges you for it. But I did this, it took me actually less than 15 minutes. It took me like 10. But I want to show you my results because it's kind of cool, the report. They give you like a little PDF. Because I think when it comes to like sort of, it feels like sometimes we're kind of swimming or floating in this process. Some of these things can be useful anchors. So one of the things, for example, like this kind of surprised me actually. I came up, my number one strength is gratitude, humor, creativity. This is actually medicine for me reading these to you right now. Bravery, which surprises me too. Social intelligence, kindness, love. I want to go to the bottom. Which ones am I really? Spirituality is low. Wow, 24. I mean, it's ranked. It's just number 24. But I thought this was a really cool report, and I wanted to just share with y'all, and here's proof that I did it 4 days ago, that I think this is a really great one. And it's a fun one, I think, both for students and for parents to check out, and of course, counselors. Okay, I want to shift our focus a little bit to ease. Part of what we're about is like, what is this whole process about and how do we navigate it with more ease? So Tom, I want to hand the baton to you for a few minutes to talk about what is it that colleges are looking for, and in particular, what are highly selective schools are looking for, and how do they read applications?
That is a great question, Ethan, and I'm glad you asked. When I first saw, one second, I'm pressing the share button and it's just gray for me. I don't know. Is it, y'all see like the back inner workings, right?
I think it's because Loom is like maybe on a thing.
It's just gray right now. So I'm refreshing, but as I'm doing that, I'll just talk. It's funny when I saw that our multi-repeated slogan of the night, ease, purpose, and joy, when I saw that my section about highly selective admissions was paired with ease, I did chuckle a little bit inside because I'm like, those seem discordant. But I guess when I think of ease and this word and the particular process when it comes to applying to highly selective colleges, my hope is that after you listen to some of the information that I am sharing with you, that there's an ease in knowing a more transparent view, or like an ease in kind of having a language and a vernacular and a toolkit to be able to describe the nuances. Because I actually think that is one of the most difficult part of applying to college and admissions, is all the layers and the levels and the different hoops and jumps and the differences between school to school. So my hope is that what the information I'm about to share with you helps make all those layers and avenues and jumping feel a little less strenuous. We want just like a little hop, a little bunny hop, not a major slam dunk, no more, not that much effort. That's what we're trying to go for.
Is it working for you? If not, I can share.
So I just press share, and it's going, but hold on one second.
I can share too.
Ethan, I'm just trying to make things easy for you.
I got it. Go.
Obviously, I'm not. Okay, so what are colleges looking for? Next slide. If you look at headlines in the news, you can ask yourself, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point again, because sometimes with headlines like this, and especially in our culture, especially in the United States, we know that CEG actually spans many different countries, so many of you may be tuning in from other places, but definitely in Western and US-centric culture, there tends to be a really stark fixation on competition and harder, better, faster, stronger. What are the best schools, hardest ones to get into, most selective, most difficult, most rigorous. And so seeing headlines like this, especially if you're a student, tuning into the call or seeing anything like this come up on your Facebook feed, JK, I know it's TikTok, you may start to get to feel a little overwhelmed. But if you go to the next slide, I really want to center this part of, this information about what schools are looking for with just some reality setting and some kind of taking a step back from all the hype and hysteria around when people say the phrase college is so hard to get into. What they really mean is highly selective colleges are so hard to get into, and are becoming more and more difficult when you see kind of lowering of acceptance rates. However, those tend to be the brass rings and the trophies that many people have been working towards for a very long time. And there's also a generational difference, right, between parents and oftentimes counselors who may have applied to colleges 10, 20 years ago, and schools that maybe they applied to at that point in their process that they didn't see as highly selective are now have completely launched into a new echelon of an institution in terms of selectivity. So there's that difference as well. So anytime I would, as a counselor working with parents, and I'd hear them say like, I can't believe, my student didn't even get into insert school that's really hard to get into. I'm like, no, it's really hard to get into that school. So this slide, I really kind of want to just unpack a little bit of like the reality of what college means in the United States for most students and most individuals who are going through this, right? So the vast majority of colleges out there are not going to be the ones that I'm talking about today. The schools and kind of the perspective and lens that I'm bringing to you has to do with my background, having worked in selective admissions at one school that I'd say is more moderately selective, College of the Holy Cross, and then one that is more highly selective, Pomona College. And there's a slide that actually kind of compares the two of them and some differences in terms of different things that influence their processes. But if you see on the left here, right, the fact that most schools have acceptance rates with over 50%, that really does kind of speak to the fact that most schools out there are going to be able to admit students who have, that have done well in school. They may not have perfect transcripts, but they've done well. They've been engaged in some way in their community. There's room for students at so many of the 2,800 colleges and universities that are in the United States. So definitely in terms of the ease message as well, I want to put that out there as the big disclaimer, the big star above all the slides that I'm sharing with you, because we actually did a poll with our College Essay Guy audience back in September, and we asked people, what do you need the most support with? How can we help you the most? What would make this process more easy for you? And the area by far, in terms of the categories that we listed, that people were hoping for more support with was highly selective colleges, almost in double digits. So kind of knowing that maybe is where many of your minds are at, we hope this information is helpful to your particular process, but also with that caveat that like, there are places, and if you have a balanced college list, which could be a whole other session, it will make things all the more easy for you. Next slide, please. So the big phrase that you're going to hear a lot if you continue to tune into College Essay Guide content is "it depends." And when you see this question at the top of the slide here, what our college is looking for, "it depends" truly is the unfortunate catchphrase, I would say, for you as parents, counselors, and students, because that's what makes this process, I'd say, not so easy, is understanding, okay, my friend and my sister last year wrote about this topic for this school, and I did the same thing this year, and it didn't work out for me, right? That just goes to show the ever-flowing landscape that is college, the changes, the fact that things that work for one student don't work for another. There is no real formula to follow. And the distinctions, colleges don't necessarily make it easy for students to know like what is really attractive and maybe rare and coveted and unusual in a pool, an applicant pool at one school may be a dime a dozen and may be super common in another school's application pool. So that distinction as well can be really, really hard to wrestle with if you're someone who's going through this, because it's like, well, I don't know who to believe because there's just all these messages going out there. So that said, next slide. This is an example of two things to kind of simplify things and just give you a sense for, okay, well, if it does depend, what are things that like basically almost all colleges are looking for? And then what are some things that are going to be a lot more variable when it comes to school? And as you can see on the left here, right, almost all colleges, you can pretty much sum up the way that they think about their admissions process as looking for talented, capable, best fit students to fill their various departments and programs. People in the admissions office, so myself a few years ago, they are tasked with what we call building a class. They are tasked with filling seats in lecture halls and in tutorial seminars, and keeping the lights on at the institutions and colleges and universities that they represent. So they're looking to meet enrollment targets. They're looking to meet a certain number of students. So they're going to send out acceptances to, 100 students, and then maybe 50 of them will say yes. That would be a really high, what we call yield rate, which you can see on the next, on the slide on the right. That's basically the number of students that if you accept, a certain number, only a certain percentage will actually go because they're choosing their options. Almost all colleges are also sadly going to be influenced by college rankings because as a society, like we rely on rankings to fuel the way that we make decisions, because with so much information out there, having someone do the work for you to help you figure out something is easy. So ease yet again. I'm not saying that's best, and actually the college essay guy way is to kind of really help dig and sift through what those rankings actually mean and have a clearer understanding of actually what you're evaluating and what you value, because sometimes those rankings actually don't really say that. But from the business end of the standpoint for a college, the rankings actually do really influence the way that they're going to make admissions decisions. And also they want a lot of people who apply, because the more people that apply, the more national attention your school gets and the more you're able to kind of sustain yourself. But on the it depends side, right? Like, something to think about is that many colleges are going to be looking for tuition revenue. They need to, again, keep the lights on. So some schools have more financial resources to be able to support students than others. So they may be looking for students to be able to come in who can pay full fees. Certain schools, such as women's colleges, minority serving institutions, so this would include historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, or HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, they may have certain populations that they're committed to, that they are part of their charter or their mission or the reason that they were built. Public institutions, right? They usually have to meet a certain percent of their students who come from a certain state. And that's a big part of also kind of how they're going to be making admissions decisions. And then also other mission-driven initiatives and institutional priorities. So one example of this would be Claremont McKenna College, where I worked at Pomona College, one of the Claremont colleges right next door. And this Claremont McKenna College was all about leadership and initiative and action, and they actively would look for those qualities in their students because it was a part of their institutional mission. So again, I just threw out lots of different terms and like possibilities for different types of schools. And again, that can make things feel not as easy. But kind of going to the next slide, I want to kind of break down, and I kind of touched on these differences in schools so we can continue to keep moving. But I kind of want to give you a distinction of, here are two different examples of two different colleges to illustrate how it depends actually works out in terms of the way that it influences the admissions process. So on the left, you have where I went to college, which is College of the Holy Cross. It's an awesome school, highly recommend it. Definitely think that any student who is interested in liberal arts in the Northeast should put it on their list. But as you can see, there are certain areas that in the admissions process at Holy Cross, regardless of the students' test scores or their grades in their classes or the activities that they were involved in and their leadership, there were certain kind of circumstantial factors and elements of what a student brought to the table that for some students gave them a bump in the process, and for other students they were just kind of part of the larger, broader pool, and therefore kind of felt more, what I like to say is familiar. And I was one of those more familiar students because I was a demographic that was very common in the application, or a little more common in the application pool for Holy Cross, because I'm from Western Massachusetts. So I was seen as a Massachusetts student in the process, and it's different. Students who came from other states that were more rare in the pool were going to have a little more of a leg up, essentially, just purely based on that circumstantial zip code and where your actual residence is in terms of the admissions process at Holy Cross. There's a few other examples of areas where they gave a little more love to students from certain populations based on the mission of Holy Cross and their vision as a Jesuit Catholic institution. And then on the flip side, you have Pomona College, which you can see has a different set of what we call institutional priorities. These are just a few examples of many priorities that colleges are going to be looking at. So they vary pretty drastically from place to place, and I'll get into those in just a second with another slide. But as you can see, the things that kind of Pomona was more proactive with, they're both small liberal arts colleges. They both have very similar academic programs and majors and philosophies, but it's very different in terms of the things that they actually were seeking out in terms of their admissions pool, or gave a little bit of a boost to essentially in their process. So next slide. So with highly selective colleges, right, kind of zooming back, right, remembering that over 75% of the colleges admit more than half the students, and most US or most college going students go to public schools, about 75% of them. Zooming in on highly selective schools, because we know that that's where a lot of people's minds are at, and they're hoping to gain entry. Many people are hoping to gain entry to that path. I think a really effective analogy that you can use to kind of think about the highly selective admissions process, and these terms that I'm tossing out there like institutional priorities, is thinking about admissions not as much as selecting students, but as building a village. So if you go to the next slide, when admissions officers are building essentially what we call like building a class, they're going to be contributing lots of different materials, and they're like an architect, you know, they're kind of, and I studied architecture in college, actually, architectural studies. So this was fun for me to kind of throw in here. But it really does, building a class involves taking a lot of different factors and elements into consideration and really thinking about students in terms of where they're coming from with lots of different contextual factors in play. And when you're building this village, it's not going to be kind of like that Wisteria Lane. This is like a Desperate Housewives reference. So none of the students are going to get it. Maybe some of the parents will get it, but it's not going to be carbon copies over and over again of the same house in the village. This is not a development. We want there to be variety. We want it to be an attractive place for people to live and be like, oh, wow, like I love how much there is to do in this village because there's so much different elements to soak up and different styles and lighting and fixtures and bells and whistles. So when you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit of when an admissions architect is building this class, they're going to be working with a lot of common materials. And this slide here gives you a little bit of a sense of things that are in a highly selective admissions pool. These things on this slide here are all pretty common to see. And sometimes this can be a little scary to see because people can be like internalizing and looking at these terms and being like, gee, like this sounds like me. And I don't like hearing that I'm common. I don't like hearing that I have strong grades or test scores. And I don't like hearing that I have leadership. No, you should be very proud of those things because they've helped cultivate your values and your interests, and they have helped you grow into who you are. But I think being aware that when people say like, I can't believe I didn't get into insert name of highly rejected school because I have great grades and great test scores and I'm so involved in school. And it's like all the students pretty much who apply to these schools at Pomona, we did a study and it was about 80% of the students who applied in our applicant pool were academically admissible, purely based on their grades and test scores. So students are self-selecting. They're not going to waste time or money or energy applying to a school that they're drastically out of range of acceptance with. You know, there are a few people who do, but most people kind of know that they're somewhere in the range of what the college is publicizing as their academic threshold, essentially, or their range. And so they throw their hat in the ring. But oftentimes what they don't realize is that a lot of kind of what they're putting forward are very common elements that can be really found in a lot of these pools pretty extensively. But on the next slide, you're going to see a little bit of some of the areas that in a highly selective college's applicant pool, these are going to be some of the more uncommon building materials, the uncommon building blocks that certain students bring to the table. And therefore, they might influence the way that a certain student is admitted or not to different colleges. So one thing that's really uncommon to see is our self-directed risk-taking learners. A lot of students kind of work and they kind of move through the courses and the projects that are available to them. And that's totally well and good. But definitely students who kind of take risks and start like a new initiative in their community, or a teacher who's writing their recommendation talks about the students who really kind of went all in on a project and asked permission to kind of modify it and change things. Students who kind of put that I guess, initiative out there definitely do stand out when you hear of the instances of that happening. Definitely, you know, there's some pragmatic realities of a difference in landscape in terms of certain academic areas being less common now in applicant pools. So at some of these selective colleges, again, it depends. So not every single one. These areas that are listed here on this slide, like humanities, arts, and social sciences, they're not quite as common in terms of student interest right now. So students who have talent, documented talent in those areas, and they've explored it extensively for years in school, that might be something that makes them a really attractive candidate to certain colleges that don't have as much of that material to work with. And then, of course, there's again, a lot of other things on this slide that reflect different circumstantial factors that are a part of who a student may be and a part of their identity that also make them uncommon, but a really rare and an exciting element and perspective to contribute to a particular class village. So yes, these villages are a blend of common and uncommon, and those ratios are going to look different from student to student, and you're never going to really know why, or what the level of uncommonness that you brought to the table was. But usually if you're admitted to a highly selective school, there is a certain combination of these common and uncommon elements that allow the admissions officer to make a case for you. So moving through this analogy, the class village, typically students are going to move through different phases, right? So the first is the quantitative foundation. So that is, and then they're going to move to the qualitative construction and the finishing touches. If you are an admissions officer, these are kind of the three phases of building a case for a student that an admissions officer is going to make. So first, qualitative foundation. Next slide, please. So the foot in the door of a college admissions process is, as I mentioned before, the quantitative foundation. So these are like the numbers, right? This is, for many students, the classes that you've taken in high school, your GPA, your test scores if those are relevant, other kind of areas of a metric. And these basically kind of like earn you a plot of land on the village map. And the one thing to keep in mind with this, if you're new to this process, is that these factors admissions officers understand. A lot of people will say like, well, my friend goes to a school down the road that's way easier and the GPAs are always higher, and I worked way harder for my 3.8 than she got for her 4.0. Sure, that is probably true. But what's important to know is that college admissions officers know that they take into consideration the context in the world that you're coming from, what types of classes are available to you, with a grading scale that your particular high school uses, and they know that when they're making decisions on students. So that's one area that I oftentimes find students and families spending so much time and energy stressing out about the things that are in other high schools and that other students are doing. And I always tell them that, like, I never once as an admissions officer was like, gee, I really wish that little Timmy transferred to the school down the road because then his GPA would be higher. Like, I know that at his school, maybe it's more rare to have students who have all A's than the school down the road. I know that because I'm reading and evaluating those files from that other high school. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you kind of navigate through this. But on the next slide, just to reiterate again, as I mentioned before, the vast majority of students are basically plottable students. They're able to get a plot of land in this village because of what they bring together when it comes to their academics. And here's just some stats from Harvard, just because they're available online publicly, to be able to show you kind of what the Harvard application pool is working with when it comes to the academics exclusively, right? So that's where the quantitative side or the qualitative side of things really kind of helps actually make a case for a student and actually gets their building built. So on the next slide, you're going to see a little more about the qualitative constructions. And when it comes to admissions, I tell people that, like, many people think of the application as a test where because we're familiar with that kind of metric, right? Like, you start with 100 points, you make mistakes, and you get dinged based on things that the admissions officer didn't like in your application. And it's not true at all. There were many times where I got students who came onto my desk in admissions that, like, I didn't particularly like the clubs or organizations that they were involved in. I didn't really like their academic interests. Like, they were admitted because they met so many institutional priorities for Pomona, and they put together a great application just objectively. But me as an individual person, I didn't really like a lot of the things that they liked or that they were into. But basically, that's not really the point. The admissions officer is not looking for mistakes. They're not like saying, oh, too many grammar errors in your essay, -5 points, boring topic, -10. They're not docking you. They're basically are actually looking for a reason to build a case to bring to their colleagues in a committee conversation to advocate for you. And usually these cases are built on the phrase that I have been tossing out a lot, which I realize I haven't really explained too much, based on institutional priorities. And thinking about institutional priorities like building codes is a really effective way to kind of think about this, because it's basically like the things that the admissions officer needs to be able to, like, ensure that the building can stay, like, how can I make this building with all the bells and whistles that I want, but make sure that basically, like, it fits the bill and, like, it can be constructed and it's not going to collapse and people aren't going to be like, what the heck is this pile of garbage, right? So on the next slide, you're going to see some examples of a few different institutional priorities that may vary from place to place, right? So I've talked a little bit about undersubscribed academic programs. That's just one example that at some schools plays an influential role. At other schools, it doesn't. Like at Holy Cross, it didn't. At Pomona, it did. Qualities and values are essential to a college's mission and identity. I gave the example of Claremont McKenna and their emphasis on leadership and doers and action. Some students are going to be admitted if they put together a particular athletic talent, or they put together, or they bring, they can play the tuba really well, or they're an incredible dancer and they send in a video portfolio that shows that. And the faculty are like, this kid, we need this kid. We have notes on the admissions end so we can see kind of how that student, if they have what the college is looking for. Different rarer states. So people say like, oh, West Virginia is a state with like, that's oftentimes like the least found in a lot of college campuses, just because it doesn't have as much of an out-of-state college going culture. So if you get a kid who has a lot of these great common building areas, but has this uncommon building area from West Virginia, that might give you a little more of a, onus to make a case for that student, right? And then, of course, there's legacy students who have a family connection to a particular school, or maybe students who come from a family where they're able to donate money to the school. Those are also things that can influence processes too. But on this last side, I just kind of want to touch on here the finishing touches. So this is kind of like, even when you kind of look at all these quantitative foundation students that are out there, and the qualitative element, the building elements that they bring, you still oftentimes have too many students to choose from, especially at some of these highly selective schools. So that's where kind of some of these more value-centered areas can maybe come and influence the decision. And a lot of times these come out in students' writing and in their stories, and then the things that they share with colleges. So that's why I really like finishing touches kind of coming on the end, because this can touch on kind of like, when students present like heart and humanity and like things that they really just have wonder for, that kind of gives you like a little bit like of a soft spot for a student. And these things really do influence and kind of make decisions, or influence the way that admissions officers are going to make decisions. So the next slide is kind of going to give an example of, as I said before, it's not going to be the Wisteria Lane development. It's going to be a little more of a wide village when you take into consideration all these factors. But this last example, before I want to turn things over to Morgan, is actually an excerpt from Bowdoin College's press release. And I think it really helps illustrate the village analogy that I just shared with you of quantitative foundation the students bring, the qualitative elements that actually get them to be constructed and get their building met in the college's class. And then those finishing touches, those bells and whistles that may or may not have pushed the needle or tipped the scale for a student who has just the right amount of stuff, but just needs a little shiny pewter lining to secure their spot, right? So on the press release, you'll see a few different words and phrases and excerpts from the way that Bowdoin talked about the points of pride in their admitted student class for the class of 2022. So the class of 2026, excuse me. So these are some of the things that they mentioned that they were really impressed by. These are the things that they were proud to tout out to the public about their incoming students. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see a little color coding that kind of shows you how they all start with that intellectual firepower. They have that, right? But it's these other qualitative elements that they're bringing to the table that kind of help certain students kind of get that full build, maybe more than other students in the pool. And then you see these green things on the end. These are definitely what I would call finishing touches, right? These are just kind of like cool little like artistic like flares and whimsy that certain students brought that were in the applicant pool that, again, not every student is going to be a halftime performer or a goat farmer or whatever else. But last slide. These elements really all do kind of come into the play when it comes to the admissions process. So I guess the takeaway for you all as students and families in thinking about this is A, knowing that the scary building process that I just described to you, with all the layers and the building materials and everything, really only applies to those highly selective schools that turn away the vast majority of students. And it does not mean that you should not go and put your hat in the ring, but I think you should be aware of the nuances and the realities of it. And places like College Essay Guy are here to help you learn how to do this more purposefully and more joyfully. And with that, I want to turn things over back to Morgan, because I definitely went way over on time, but I hope it was helpful information to you.
It was lovely. Morgan, well, let me, before we kick it to you, I want to just say that there are so many ways, and today is really, this is the first webinar of the year. This is sort of like an intro to college admissions for some folks. And so part of that was groundwork. And part of what we're going to be laying out throughout the year is like a bunch of different ways. Like Tom mentioned, for example, expand the importance of expanding and having a deep college list that isn't just focused on highly selectives. I'm going to share a resource on that in just a second. But Morgan, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the summer. How can students begin to start thinking about their summer?
Yeah, well, I have some slides. I'm not going to talk for very long, but if we want the visual, do you want to pull that up or do you want me to?
I'll do it. I'll bring it back up. Yes.
Okay. There's just a few there.
You got it.
I'm a visual processor, so I just love to see a slide while I'm hearing someone speak. And also, I think that beautiful pink flamingo float should give you a little bit of relief after hearing about highly selective admissions. So
you mean the ease? Yeah.
Isn't Tom wonderful? He takes something that's really serious and intense and gives us a lot of really good information. And anyway, we could talk about highly selective admissions all night and just not end this Zoom call for like 10 more hours. So I'm sorry to cut that short, but more to come. So a little bit on summer planning. Okay. And if we think about ease, purpose, and joy, and we think about questions that come up at this time of year, a lot of students ask us about what should I'm thinking about summer, what should I do? And you can see some of the things they start to ask. And this is where it usually starts. What do colleges want to see? What summer programs would look good on my applications? And people are often wondering if a certain type of program will look good. There's nothing wrong with wondering that, right? But when the focus is too much on, if I do this thing, will I get some kind of benefit in the college admissions process? And so I'm here to ask sort of, or propose here, why not ask? What do I want to do this summer? So for students, I think when you have opportunities to make decisions about how you spend the summer, if you could honestly start there and have an authentic answer for yourself, I think that would provide a lot of value. For parents, it's also your challenge to really try to get at what that truth is for the student. Like, do you want to keep doing the things you've always been doing? Or are there other things to explore that might, bring you some more joy and some more intellectual engagement in the summer in a way that would align with the students' values, like who they are now, not maybe who they were 5 years ago. Okay, next slide, please. So when I think about values, and we kind of started thinking about values, the thing that I thought of when I think about summer planning is, what are my values and how would I advise students and families in thinking about summer planning? So these are my 3 top values here: curiosity, authenticity, and practicality. You can imagine these qualities come in really handy for a college counselor, being really curious about your students. But if I thought about, I'm a high school student and I get to think about what I want to do this summer, having curiosity is such a great place to start. So I align that maybe with things like travel or learning something new that's intellectually inspiring. There's no shortage of programs that provide you with those opportunities. I'm based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and one of the ones that's not too far from me is called Broad Reach. And they take students on like sailboats for the summer. Right now, you may not want to be on a boat for a number of weeks, but there's these opportunities where you can just like lean into your curiosity and have these life-changing experiences. So lots of travel opportunities out there. Authenticity, I think, is interesting because for students here, it's to think about, what could you do this summer that's really something that would be inspiring and invigorating for you? That's not because your friends are doing it or because you've always done it or because it's easy. It's what might take you out of your comfort zone or be really exciting to think about. Sometimes those are the things where you're like, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it, like the healthy way of doing that. But it's to think about, you don't have to keep doing what you've been doing and what would really align with who you feel like you are now. And then practicality, I think when I think about for some people, that practicality of having a job in the summer, sometimes that's by necessity, sometimes it's by choice, but that's also a great way to spend your time. And so part of these things is like thinking about when you go back and, to school and you're like, well, what should I do this summer? And there's like flyers hanging up and things, is to kind of center it back to when you were looking at the values list earlier, what are the things that you feel like are really important to you? Maybe it's health and fitness, maybe it's faith. There's different ways to take your passions and then work them into a choice for the summer. All right, next slide. All right, so there are lots of different ways to spend your summer. And I think the reason why the focus on values is so helpful is because colleges don't have like a built-in preference about one summer experience being greater than another. And so I think there are some myths out there that just kind of live in our society, that if I do a program at a highly selective college, that somehow that will maybe connect me to the school and help me get in. There are rare circumstances where colleges have recruitment programs that serve that purpose, but it's not for the vast majority of students. So you don't want to be driven by, oh, this summer program at, fill in the blank, school that admits 5% of its applicants, like that brand on your application is going to be the thing that helps you. And when Tom and I were chatting this morning, actually, we talked about this some, because sometimes I think when you pick this brand name college to do a summer program for 6 weeks, you start to think to yourself that brand is going to carry you and it's going to look good on applications. And the reality is it's what you get out of the program and what you put into it, right? Like, how do you thrive in that environment? And when you can convey that in college application writing, that's where your passion starts to jump off the page and you can start to differentiate yourself. It's not only because you attended the program, or it's not only because you did research in the summer, it's because there's something about it that really sparked something in you. It could be intellectual, personal, whatever. But it's just, it's when you kind of come back to the value that you bring to the program that really helps. Definitely do not assume that cost equals quality or value. There's some really expensive programs out there, and that doesn't make them bad either, right? But it just doesn't guarantee anything. And so I just would want to be cautious about that. There's so many things you could do that are low or no cost, that are invigorating and align with your values and look good also, that it's not that you have to spend a lot to get some kind of value. And also just don't fall into this idea that by spending a lot, it's somehow going to lead to greater value later. Because if a student just goes through the motions, it really isn't going to enhance their applications in a major way. So this is really, when you think about this, and if it haunts you over, depending on what year your child is or what you are, as you think about what do I do this summer, is going to come back. If you're not thinking about it yet, it will come up later. And I really would love for you to think about, oh, let me pull up that College Essay Guide values list and think about, like, what are those values that I connect with most, and how can I make decisions that align with those choices? And then there's one last slide. This is just a little bit of evidence for you from a survey to show you how on just one survey, colleges viewed various summer experiences. And you can see, if you put a margin of error on this survey, plus or minus, let's say 5%, you can see there's kind of a big gray area here, that doing internships is only marginally perceived to be better, right? And if you've gone through the motion to do an internship that someone else gave you, and you didn't do a lot, and didn't go very often, it's really going to have less value in itself. So just to take a quick look at this and go, yeah, they all have value, and that the focus really should be on what would be the greatest way for you to spend your summer. And also, I think it's important to add, having rest and relaxation time shouldn't be like undervalued. That's important too. And that sometimes can bring you joy. But what you can't do, right, if you're thinking about college admissions, is nothing. So it's kind of a combination of things. You want to use some common sense, but also do things that you feel like are inspiring for your summer. I would love to continue talking about summer a bit longer, but I think we're heading into the next segment of our program. So look me up anytime if you want to continue that.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things I was going to talk about, but I think I'll kick it to like overtime, is looking into 2023 and what does that look like. And I think I'll push that just a few minutes because I want to make sure, in case anybody needs to leave at the top of the hour, you can do that. But I want to share with you a few more resources that we have in terms of making through this process. So the three things I'd say we're known for, number one is free resources. So we got a whole bunch. One of our most popular pages is our college application hub. So a lot of students don't know what a hub is, and I just tell them it's a husband. No, it's it's a place where there are all the things. So one of the things that we talked about is like developing a great college list, and we've got an awesome resource on that. We've got a timeline that helps get students through the process. We've got, drum roll please, a YouTube channel with tons of videos. If you prefer to watch shorter videos than this hour long, we've got a whole bunch. We've got some with admission officers, and we've got them on, pretty much all aspects of the process. And we've got a cool podcast. If you go on long walks and you're like, oh, I could totally do some college admission podcasts. We've got everything from, colleges that change lives, which is also related to like liberal arts schools and building a college list. We've got an interview with Ted Fisk from the Fisk Guide himself. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. We've got, what else? Oh, we've got this cool program. This is a program. Another thing we're known for is like video courses. So one of the things that we're launching tomorrow that we're super excited about is this college admissions pass. And so essentially what we've done is we've taken our courses and we're putting them all sort of lined up for 9th, 10th, and 11th graders into one experience essentially. And I'll share out this link. Actually, you'll get it in an email tomorrow. But essentially what we've got is, I'll just walk you through some of the main things. We've got a community. We've got communities, one for students and one for parents. And there's like expert-led courses on things like list building, things like how to pay for college. We've also got, specific groups and accountability partners if students are interested in that. We've had 25,000 students, we learned this last year, go through our courses. What else is in here? Oh, we've got different tracks for different students. So if you have a 9th grader, there's a 9th grade track, 10th grader, 11th graders, it's obviously a little more intense. There's more content in that one. Who is this not for? I would say it's for, anybody who's sort of navigating this process. If you're somebody who's like, no, we want a little more, one-on-one support, we do that as well for 9th, 10th, 11th graders. But this is sort of like the opportunity to do it in a cohort model. Some of the things that we'll talk about will be like, our first session is going to be about setting goals and intentions for the year. We're going to get into like some specific exercises on that. We'll talk about Tom's leading a course. Some of the stuff that he was sharing was from his course on applying to highly selective schools. We'll talk about finding your major. Morgan's leading a session on that. So anyway, that's that. We'll share this link out with you all. And if folks are interested, yes, we do offer one-on-one support. I'll share a link with more on that. But I want to segue to Q&A to see what questions are. I know that one popped up in terms of institutional priorities. Tom, somebody was asking, how do you find out what colleges apostrophe institutional priorities are? And actually, well, I want to hear briefly from both of you on this. So whoever feels like answering it.
I'll jump in first.
Yeah, Morgan.
Which is not really the answer, but it's the first thing I thought of when I read that question. It depends where you are in the process of thinking about that, but the answer to the question isn't something you need till you're a little bit further along. So there are ways to find that out, but rather than seeking information on that when you're in 9th grade or 10th grade, or when you still have 30 colleges that you're looking at, after you've done some visits and started to narrow the list, that's a better time to start looking at some of that nuance on institutional priorities. I think you could spend a lot of wasted research time if you start that too early. All right, Tom.
No, I mean, it's one of those things that, because colleges like to be I'm all about transparency on this. I'm going to make this easy for you. I'm not going to be jumping through no hoops. Because colleges rely on applications like to sustain themselves, like they're not just going to go out and do like a webinar of like, here's all the things we're really low on, and if you all could go find out people for us and send our way, that would be great. Because colleges, it's not really like an audition process. It's not like they give you a list of like, here's the things that we really need right now, or are more uncommon in our pool, so please come. What they're going to do is say that we admit students who are talented and like they're going to kind of speak a little more broadly, and that makes it harder for you as a student and family going through it to be like, well, I really like this place. I don't really know if the things that I'm bringing to the table are exceptionally rare in their process, but that shouldn't stop you from applying and putting your hat in the ring. I think just knowing that these priorities exist and that they influence decisions behind the scenes, and that is why sometimes when students don't get the news that they are looking for, it can be hard to know, like, what did I do wrong? it's not like, again, like I said before, it wasn't a test. It wasn't that you lost points because you were deficient or because you didn't have something. It's purely a mismatch of essentially, you know, buyers and sellers is another term that Jeff Salingo uses in a book that he wrote all about this process. And definitely recommend reading that book, actually, if you are looking for further information about institutional priorities and the ways that college decisions, who gets in and why. It's a great book. We love Jeff. He's awesome. So that's a really great place as well that kind of covers 3 different institutions that have different priorities. I saw Beth had a question on the line of institutional priorities about majors and how you can maybe know what are some undersubscribed majors at certain places. One thing that I would actually say to do is to look at colleges' press releases, because usually they celebrate and kind of like put out there, kind of like Bowdoin did, some of the things that maybe they are more likely to be looking for in their students and are more likely to be proud to share out to the world. So that can sometimes give you a clue. Oftentimes though, really to know what's more common, you basically can look at the most popular majors, because people are going to go and look for the schools with best whatever program, and usually that means that a lot of students are going to be applying for the program that the school is the most known for. That, again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. It just means that you should know that that's going to be a part of your candidacy, that many other students are also going to be interested in participating in that path. And the people at the college oftentimes represent various departments, tenured faculty who are there in insert obscure major, who also, you know, need students and love, right? So keeping that in mind and knowing that some schools are really open and transparent about capped majors, like the University of California system has a whole list of majors that are oversubscribed, or the word is, I'm blanking on it right now, capacity.
That's a good word, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, but the other thing though is, like, when you think about these questions, they're really interesting, they're really nuanced. But when you start going down the path of looking at what's unique and different, what can I pursue at this college? What do they want? You start getting a little bit off course if you go there too early, because you can't just say, well, I'm going to pick Latin as my major because it's undersubscribed if you don't really like Latin. And so part of this, I think, does come back to knowing yourself, knowing your worth and what you're looking for, you know, crafting a list that aligns with those values and what you're seeking geographically and size range and things like that. And then you start to discover, oh, there's these other things that this school is looking for, but they're not so wildly different that there is a back door that you can look for. And when you start putting your energy into looking for that, you're kind of getting off course of just having a great academic record and determining what you like. So I would be cautious about giving that too much energy right now.
Agreed.
I want to put in a quick plug for tomorrow's session, because this is part 1 of 2. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about purpose. I was going to say porpoise. We're not going to be talking about porpoises. We might. But let me just give you the quick bullet points for that. You'll get them in the email, of course. But we're going to talk about what is happiness, what makes life most worth living. Yes, huge things like this. How to find your why. So that's, you know, more purpose stuff. A simple exercise to assess if you're spending the time the way you want to be. I've actually got a pie chart exercise where students and parents can map out, hey, am I spending the time I want to be? It's a cool, reflective one. I'm going to share some of my favorite productivity tips, including my favorite to-do list. I'm a pretty productive person. My wife jokes that I'm like 3 times more productive than most people she knows. So I'm going to share the to-do list that I use, that I've been using for like 10 years. And then we're even going to get into like 7 ways to get better at savoring life. So please join us for tomorrow, but let's keep the party going. Were any of the questions for either of you that you saw that you jumped on, or shall I just lob one to you?
We have a new question about if a student is undecided on major, is showing that they have been exploring different options important? Is there something to look for to help understand how schools support undecided students? I mean, really, most schools do support undecided students, and most colleges you'll come in with an advisor. There are some colleges that invite you to apply into programs that are designed for people who are undecided. So that is an option, but I think that when you are curious about the world and academically motivated, you don't need to know that major going in unless you have to use it from a strategy standpoint because the college is asking that. And you'll be limited if you don't. So I think if you're undecided, just stay curious about the world is what I would say to you. And I don't think there's anything in particular you need to do, but you may need to articulate in writing on the application why you're interested in various things, and maybe be able to say that in a nice, coherent, compelling way.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit further in terms of the application. I think there's like two parts of it. There's like the sort of life exploration, hey, explore all the things. And then I think students get a little stressed about it when they have to communicate about it in the application. And so when it comes to the application, I think going, if a college, for example, has a why major essay, so I'm going to get really tactical for a second. A why major essay is like, why do you want to apply into this particular major? If you are undecided, that can be hard to write. And one of the things I'll tell students to do is like, pick two things that you're really into, or pick one. I mean, it could just be pick one thing and go, hey, this is a thing. Here's a student that I worked with this past year who was like, he wrote all his applications and was like, math. And then his counselor was like, actually, I don't know if you're going to be competitive for math with all these other ones. And he's like, I don't know if I want to apply for math. So he ended up shifting to undecided. And he emphasized that math was something that he was super into, but he was also interested in art making, in sculpting. He was also interested in, I think he listed like a third thing. And he sort of said, here are all the things that I'm interested in. And here are some things that I could see myself exploring in the future. But ultimately, and he ended up coming back to like the values that were, that connected these things. One of them was creativity. One of them was building things. So his math side and his sculpting side both have these common values of creativity and building things. So what ends up happening sometimes when students are talking about this is like, we'll explore from values, we'll end up talking about how that manifests. And then ultimately these kind of end up being some of those takeaways, those things that kind of cinch and tie things together so that it doesn't feel all over the place, so that it does feel like, okay, yeah, there are some common threads or themes here. Having said that, I'll say in the same breath that, yeah, there are schools that, when you're trying to apply to Babson for business, yeah, you need to say, I've been interested in doing X, Y, and Z for business. Here's how I've been entrepreneurial, at least in my life, even if it's not starting my own business. Here are some of those entrepreneurial qualities that I've been able to manifest in really specific ways. So it depends, shrug emoji.
Ethan, we had a comment asking
about more questions. Go.
Someone was asking about the trends. They wanted to hear about the trends for 23.
Go. Oh gosh, I should do. Okay. So I'll talk more about this tomorrow. The three things that I think, go ahead. Oh, is that
I was going to say, no, definitely preview first.
Okay. So here are the things that I think are going to have a big impact. Actually, I'm just going to like do this thing. I'm actually just going to do like a little hors d'oeuvre for tomorrow, because I think I do want to spend more than like the 2 minutes that I want to take right here talking about these things. I'll have to do some segue from joy or purpose, but a couple of the things that I'm tracking for. Number one is I think that we should be talking about AI and ChatGPT. And I don't know how much y'all have like played around with this or seen it, but it's fairly blowing my mind. And I think it's going to have an impact not only on students and how they're going through school and this application process, but I think it's going to maybe have an impact. I think it's pretty sure it's going to have an impact on college admissions. The second thing, I'm just going to name the three things and I'll talk about them more tomorrow. So you'll have to tune in then. The second thing that I think is going to have an impact on the college admission landscape is the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action. Most of the folks that I'm talking to have a sense that it's not an if, it's when that affirmative action will be struck down. And what that will mean, and we'll follow up with an article, is that colleges won't be able to take race into account when it comes to admissions. So what's going to happen as a result? Couple things I predict. I think colleges will still be interested in having a diverse pool, but given that they're not going to be able to ask specifically on their application about race, they're going to have to find other ways to draw students from many different backgrounds to their application and to put together a diverse class, because I think colleges still will want a diverse class. So I think schools might be changing their recruiting strategies. I think that schools could actually end up changing their supplemental essays. This is just me. This is Ethan's opinion that I think there could be some new supplemental essays that come out. We've already seen this over the last 1.5 years or 2 years, where colleges have started to ask supplemental essay questions that really try to get at students' experiences as being a diverse person, which can mean lots of different things, and experiences with diversity, which again is a very broad term. So I think we could see specifically some colleges changing their supplemental essay prompts. The third thing, which I'm not going to get into right now, has to do with testing, with the test optional. And I actually want to invite a conversation about that tomorrow. So hopefully that's not too frustrating, but those are some of the things that I think that will shift in the coming year. Let's do 2 more questions. And Morgan and Tom, I'm going to let you grab one each from the chat.
I'll take the question from Swift. Our college is considering the fact that current high school juniors spent their freshman year on Zoom. That's a neat question. That's starting to seem kind of in the past. And I don't think that will be a huge factor in, did you already say that, Tom?
I did, and hot take, I was like, yes, they will.
Well, if you have grades from that year, they're not going to see it as that different from other years. So if there's something you need to share about it, I would definitely do that. But I don't think, I think probably the emotional effect of what has happened during this time for teenagers has been more dramatic than what you've seen on transcripts in terms of the way grades have actually shown through. A lot of students' grades remained a bit inflated in that time.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, Morgan. I think colleges will be keeping in mind, and I can say this because I was there, and also, Morgan and I both know from working in high schools prior to this, like the developmental kind of reality of, I think, the impact of when Zoom hit certain students as they were kind of coming and transitioning into this new era of high school. Some students maybe go to a school where it's K through 12 and maybe it's not as much of a transition, but for many of them, having ninth grade online and that like pivotal adjustment period is very jarring, and can be difficult to like find your place in school and find your niche to like move up in leadership roles within the school community, because you're kind of just like treading water and like trying to like stay, keeping your sleep and sanity and everything, right? So I definitely think that colleges do keep this in mind. And I think, of course, the counselor recommendation and the context that your school will be able to bring in terms of the way that the pandemic influenced not just your individual student journey and path, but also the broader community outside of that, and what COVID looked like and how it kind of impacted course availability, ability to kind of, like find that sense of belonging and like find yourself. That's still, it's definitely okay if students, if you're hearing that, it's like, it's okay if you're like, well, my sister 3 years ago, like she got all her crap together really quickly and now I feel like I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, know that you're very much not alone and that there's thousands of students across the world that are like, you have a lot of solidarity with and you don't even know. So yeah,
Sean McElroy made a good point that this is a place where counselors, and I know we've got counselors on this call, can advocate for students, and lots of counselors will do that. They'll include that information. I've seen some counselors update their school profile and be like, hey, here's our school profile, this, and here's some details about how our school was impacted, what happened during the pandemic. Others will choose to write a paragraph that they'll copy and paste into all their letters in terms of here's the thing that happened for us. And so there is that extra information. Other counselors aren't necessarily doing that, but how do you know? You got to talk to your counselor. So go talk to your school counselor and say, hey, don't, be nice about it, but out of curiosity, what is being communicated about? If you feel like there is important information there to communicate, but if you're not sure, or you feel like you're not getting the information you want, you can use the additional information section to communicate important context about what your experience was during the pandemic. And I put in a link to a blog post that we wrote that, for me, I really encourage students to use the additional information section and not make it your personal statement, because so many students are writing about the pandemic. I was impacted by the pandemic. Sadly, with many students, it was it's isolation and loneliness and, mental health issues and anxiety and all those things. So I wouldn't say let that dominate your personal statement. I would say include that. There's a 250-word section for specifically on COVID, and there's a separate larger section where students can communicate about that. But I would, because that's such a common thing, I would encourage students to, keep that factual and straightforward, as I mentioned in the post. Okay, let's call it there. We're over. So many people seeing the recording and be like, what? They went 77 minutes? We're glad you're here, and thanks for being a part of our extended community. And we look forward to connecting you, whether it's on a free webinar, or we'll send out more info about the college admissions pass and the one-on-one stuff. And thanks for being here, and we're here to support. So let us know how we can help. All right, sending you all the heart emojis. See you all soon. Bye.